What's going on YouTube? Listen up, young elder gang. This is Vince O'Connor at You with Another Banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes. In this video, you will find history, definitions, scripture, information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning, the truth. Keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button, young elder gang. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Hit that bell and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. The Yuma War, which took place between 1850 and 1853, was a conflict between the Quechan Native American tribe and primarily California militias, sparked by the brutal attacks of a group called the Glanton Gang on the Quechan people along the Colorado River, leading to a series of retaliatory attacks and ultimately the establishment of Fort Yuma by the U.S. military to quell the conflict. The war ended with a fragile peace after the military intervention. Key points about the Yuma War. Triggering event. The Glanton Gang, a group of scalp hunters, violently attacked and abused the Quechan tribe at their ferry crossing on the Colorado River, causing significant casualties and prompting retaliation from the Quechan. California militia response. Following the Glanton massacre, California State Militia launched the Gila expedition to attack the Quechan, further escalating the conflict. Military intervention. To establish order and secure the area, the U.S. Army under Major Samuel P. Heintzelman intervened, building Fort Yuma along the Colorado River and eventually negotiating a peace treaty with the Quechan. Impact. The Yuma War resulted in significant loss of life for the Quechan people and further displacement from their traditional lands. The Mariposa War, December 1850, June 1851, also known as the Yosemite Indian War, was a conflict between the United States and the indigenous people of California's Sierra Nevada in the 1850s. The war was fought primarily in Mariposa County and surrounding areas, and was sparked by the discovery of gold in the region. As a result of the military expedition, the Mariposa Battalion became the first non-indigenous group to enter Yosemite Valley and the Nelder Grove. The war began in 1850 when miners entered the area of the Sierra Nevada foothills, which was traditionally occupied by the Awanachee, a band of the southern Sierra Miwok people. The miners began to take over the Awanachee's land and resources, leading to tensions between the two groups. The Awanachee, led by their chief Tenaya, fought back against the miners, resulting in a series of skirmishes that escalated into a full-scale war. The California state government under Governor John McDougal raised the Mariposa Battalion, led by Sheriff James D. Savage, to subdue the indigenous people. The Walker War was a series of violent conflicts between Mormon settlers and Ute warriors in Utah in 1853-1854. Causes. The war was caused by a number of factors, including the Mormons expanding their settlements into Ute hunting grounds and Brigham Young's laws regulating trade between the Spanish and UTEs. Events. The war began with a series of Ute raids on Mormon settlers. The Mormons responded with force, and the war included fierce battles, raids, and the execution of unarmed Ute prisoners. The UTEs used guerrilla tactics, attacking small groups of Mormons and stealing livestock. Outcome, the war ended with a peace agreement between Chief Wakara of the UTEs and Brigham Young of the Mormons on May 11, 1854. The Walker War had a major impact on the Mormon settlers, who abandoned their homes and moved into forts. The war also led to the first revolver adopted by the U.S. Army, the Model 1847 Walker Colt. The Walker War ended through negotiations between Young and Wakara during the winter of 1853. Casualties during the war equaled about 12 white settlers and an estimated equal amount of Indians. The following summer, about 120 of Wakara's tribe were baptized as Mormons. The Sioux Wars, primarily referring to the Great Sioux War of 1876 to 1877, saw a series of battles between the Sioux Native American tribes and the United States military, most notably the Battle of Little Bighorn, where the Sioux, led by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, decisively defeated General Custer's forces, resulting in a major U.S. military loss. However, the war ultimately ended with the Sioux being forced onto reservations after sustained military pressure and surrender, marking a significant loss for the Native American tribes involved. Key points about the Sioux Wars. The primary cause was the U.S. government's push to acquire the Sioux land, particularly the Black Hills, which were considered sacred by the Sioux. Major battle, Battle of Little Bighorn. This battle is widely known for the near annihilation of Custer's 7th Cavalry, considered a major Native American victory. Leaders, prominent Sioux leaders during the war included Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. Outcome, despite the initial Sioux victory at Little Bighorn, the U.S. military eventually overwhelmed the Sioux forces, forcing them onto reservations and effectively ending the war. Aftermath, the Sioux were confined to smaller reservations, their way of life disrupted, and further conflicts like the Wounded Knee Massacre occurred later on, stemming from tensions related to the loss of land and cultural practices. The First Sioux War, fought between 1854 and 1856, primarily consisted of two major engagements. The Grattan Massacre, where Sioux warriors killed a group of American soldiers, including Lieutenant Grattan, due to a misunderstanding, and the Battle of Blue Water Creek, where General William S. Harney led a punitive expedition against the Sioux, destroying their villages and inflicting a decisive defeat, effectively forcing the Sioux to seek peace after experiencing heavy losses. This conflict marked a significant early chapter in the complex history of relations between the U.S. government and the Sioux tribes, setting the stage for future conflicts over land and territory. Key points about the First Sioux War. Triggering event: the Grattan Massacre, where a small group of soldiers were killed by Sioux warriors after a dispute over a cow. Major battle: the Battle of Blue Water Creek, where General Harney led a large military force to retaliate against the Sioux, resulting in a significant Sioux loss. Impact: this war demonstrated the U.S. military's willingness to use force against the Sioux, leading to further tensions and conflicts over land in the future. The Klickitat people were involved in several battles during the Indian War of 1855-1856, including, in 1855, Captain William Strong led a company of Washington volunteers to meet with Klickitat tribe members who had fled an internment near Fort Vancouver. The meeting did not turn violent, and Captain Strong and Chief Umtuch agreed that the tribe would return to the fort the next day. However, Chief Umtuch was killed, and Captain Strong withdrew his troops to allow the tribe time to honor their chief. The area where the meeting took place became known as Battleground. Connell's Prairie. In early 1856, Klickitat, Nisqually, and Yakima warriors fought U.S. Army soldiers and Washington Territorial volunteers at Connell's Prairie in Pierce County. The Klickitat chief, Canasket, was killed, and the Indians withdrew. The Cascades Massacre. On March 26, 1856, a coalition of tribes, including the Klickitat, attacked white soldiers and settlers in the Cascades Rapids. 14 settlers and 3 U.S. soldiers died in the attack. Battle of Seattle. On January 26, 1856, the Klickitat surrounded the city during the Battle of Seattle. Indian Wars List and Timeline Legends of America. The Klickitats were eventually removed from their home range and joined the Yakima tribes on the Yakima Reservation in eastern Washington. The Klickitat War erupted in 1855. The Klickitat capitulated and joined in the Yakima Treaty at Camp Stevens on June 9, 1855. They ceded their lands to the United States. Most of them settled upon the Yakima Indian Reservation, a minority on the Grand Ronde community. The Rogue River Wars, which took place in southern Oregon between 1851 and 1856, were a series of violent conflicts between Native American tribes and white settlers, primarily sparked by the discovery of gold and subsequent influx of miners into the region, leading to the forced removal of the indigenous people to reservations at Grand Ronde and Siletz after a series of battles, most notably the Battle of Big Bend, where the Native American forces nearly defeated the U.S. Army before ultimately surrendering. This resulted in one of the most devastating Indian wars in the West, with high casualties on both sides. Key points about the Rogue River Wars. Causes: the discovery of gold in the Rogue River Valley led to a rapid influx of white settlers, disrupting the traditional way of life of the indigenous tribes who lived there, including the Takelma, Shasta, and Athapascan-speaking peoples. Major battles. The most significant battle was the Battle of Big Bend, where Native American forces nearly defeated the U.S. Army before being overwhelmed by reinforcements. Outcome: the war ended with the forced removal of the Native American tribes from their land and relocation to reservations, primarily the Siletz Reservation on the Oregon coast. Impact: the Rogue River Wars resulted in a significant loss of life for both Native Americans and white settlers, leaving a lasting legacy of conflict and displacement. The Third Seminole War was a series of skirmishes between the United States and the Seminoles that took place in Florida from 1855 to 1858. Causes. The war was caused by increasing tensions between the Seminoles and Miccosukes and the white settlers in central and southern Florida. The U.S. military also destroyed a large Seminole plantation in December 1855, which may have been an attempt to provoke a violent response. Leader. The war was led by Chief Billy Bowlegs, a prominent Seminole leader who had taken control after Chief Sam Jones became too old. Outcome. The war ended with most of the remaining Seminoles agreeing to move to Indian Territory in exchange for cash and safe passage. However, a small group of Seminoles led by Chief Sam Jones remained in Florida and hid in the Big Cypress Swamp. The descendants of these Seminoles, along with a few families who returned from the West, are the approximately 3,500 Seminoles in Florida today. Other events. The war also disrupted construction of the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse, which was slowed by Seminole attacks and outbreaks of malaria or yellow fever. The Yakima War, which took place primarily between 1855 and 1858, saw the Yakima Native American tribe fight against the U.S. military due to increasing white settlement on their traditional lands in the Columbia Plateau region of Washington, ultimately resulting in the Yakima being forced onto a reservation after suffering significant losses and being defeated in battles like the Battle of 4 Lakes near Spokane, Washington, where Colonel George Wright decisively defeated the Native American coalition in 1858. Key points about the Yakima War. Leaders. The Yakima were led by Chief Kamiakin. Triggering event, growing white settlement and pressure to move onto reservations. Major battles. The Battle of Toppenish Creek was the first engagement, and the Battle of 4 Lakes marked a decisive defeat for the Native Americans. Outcome. The Yakima were forced to cede most of their land and were confined to a reservation south of present-day Yakima. In September 1858, Wright's troops defeated the Yakima and their allies in the Battle of 4 Lakes near Spokane, Washington. Though the main Indian leader, Yakima Chief Kamiakin, fled to Canada, 24 other chiefs were captured and then hanged or shot. The Puget Sound War, also known as the Puget Sound Treaty War, was a conflict between Native American tribes in the Puget Sound region and the Washington Territorial Militia, primarily occurring between 1855 and 1856, where the Native Americans resisted forced relocation onto reservations, culminating in a series of skirmishes and the final battle near Connell's Prairie, where the Native Americans, reportedly led by Chief Leshy, ambushed a militia column, ultimately retreating after several hours of fighting. This war resulted in the forced removal of Native Americans to reservations and the controversial trial and execution of Chief Leshy, who was accused of murder despite questions about the legitimacy of the charges during wartime. Key points about the Puget Sound War. Cause. The conflict was primarily triggered by the forced relocation of Native Americans onto small reservations by the Washington Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens, who negotiated treaties that many tribes considered unfair. Major battle. The final major battle of the war was considered to be the Battle of Seattle, where a group of Native Americans attacked the town of Seattle, though the conflict involved several smaller skirmishes throughout the region. Chief Leshy, a prominent Nisqually leader, became a central figure in the war and was later captured and executed for the murder of a settler despite controversy surrounding the evidence against him. Outcome. The war effectively ended with the Native Americans being forced onto reservations, although tensions and conflicts continued in the region for years afterward. After several hours of skirmishing and several charges by the volunteers, the natives withdrew, taking their dead and wounded with them, but leaving behind bloody clothing and drums, among other items. Following the battle, Leshy and his remaining warriors retreated over the Cascades into eastern Washington. The Battle of Klamath and Salmon River War, also known as the Klamath War or Red Cap War, was a conflict in the mid-19th century between Native American tribes, primarily the Yurok and Karok, and white settlers along the Klamath River in California, primarily miners, where tensions erupted over land rights and access to fishing grounds, leading to violence and massacres of indigenous people, eventually resulting in the U.S. government establishing a reservation for the tribes to quell the conflict. This is considered part of the larger California genocide narrative. Key points about the Klamath and Salmon River War. Cause: disputes over land and fishing rights between Native Americans and white settlers, particularly miners, along the Klamath River. Red Caps, a group of Native Americans often referred to as Red Caps, were particularly resistant to settler demands and became a focal point of the conflict. Violence, the conflict involved numerous killings on both sides, with settlers attacking Native American villages and tribes retaliating. Military intervention, the California State Militia and U.S. Army eventually intervened to suppress the conflict. Reservation establishment. Following the war, the U.S. government established the Yurok Reservation along the lower Klamath River, forcing the tribes to relocate. The Tintic War was a conflict between Mormon settlers and the Ute Native American tribe, primarily caused by the UTEs stealing cattle from the settlers during a drought. The war ended with the U.S. government forcibly relocating the UTEs to the Uinta and Ouray Reservation, effectively taking their land without proper compensation, which led to lingering issues even after World War II, when the Indian Claims Commission demanded payment for the confiscated land. Key points about the Tintic War. Cause: the Ute tribe, led by Chief Tintic, began stealing cattle from Mormon settlements due to a severe drought, causing tensions to escalate. Location: the conflict primarily took place in the Tintic and Cedar Valleys in Utah. Outcome: the U.S. government intervened, forcing the UTEs to move to the Uinta and Ouray Reservation, effectively ending the war. Legacy: the forced removal of the UTEs without proper payment for their land led to ongoing disputes with the government that continued into the 20th century. The Tule River War, which took place in 1856, was a conflict between American settlers and the Yokuts Native American tribe in the southern San Joaquin Valley of California, where the Yokuts fought back against encroaching settlers, resulting in several skirmishes and ultimately a military campaign by the California State Militia and U.S. Army to subdue the tribe, forcing them onto a reservation. The war is considered a tragic event in California history due to the devastating impact on the Yokuts people and their traditional way of life. Key points about the Tule River War. Cause: increasing settlement by white Americans in Yokuts territory, leading to land disputes and tensions over resources. Combatants: Yokuts Native Americans against California State Militia and U.S. Army troops from Fort Miller. Major events: several small battles and skirmishes occurred throughout the San Joaquin Valley, with the Yokuts utilizing guerrilla tactics against the better-armed military forces. Outcome: the Yokuts were eventually defeated and forced onto a reservation, significantly reducing their population and disrupting their traditional way of life. The Coeur d'Alene War was a series of battles in 1858 between the United States and Native American tribes in Idaho and Washington. Battle of Pine Creek. In May 1858, 1,000 Native Americans defeated 164 American troops led by Colonel Edward Steptoe. The American troops escaped in the night, leaving their equipment and burying their dead. Battle of Four Lakes. In September 1858, Colonel George Wright's troops defeated the Native Americans at Four Lakes near Spokane, Washington. The U.S. Army suffered no losses while the Native Americans lost 1,720 dead and many wounded. Battle of Spokane Plains. 4 days after the Battle of Four Lakes, Wright's troops defeated another Native American force at Spokane Plains. The Army victory shattered the Native American alliance and effectively ended the war. After the Battle of Four Lakes, Wright called a council of local Native Americans at Lata Creek and imposed a peace treaty on September 23, 1858. The treaty required most of the tribes to move to reservations. A map of the original Coeur d'Alene territory, shown in red, and the subsequent reservation, shown in purple. In May 1858, a combined force of about 1,000 Skitswish, Spokane, and Palouse attacked and defeated a force of 164 American troops under Colonel Edward Steptoe at the Battle of Pine Creek. The Mendocino War was a conflict between the Yuki, mainly Yuki tribes, and white settlers in Mendocino County, California between July 1859 and January 1860. It was caused by settler intrusion and slave raids on native lands and subsequent native retaliation, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of Yuki. In 1859, a band of locally sponsored rangers led by Walter S. Jarboe, called the Eel River Rangers, raided the countryside in an effort to remove the natives from settler territory and move them onto the Nome Cult Farm, an area near the Mendocino Indian Reservation. By the time the Eel River Rangers were disbanded in 1860, Jarboe and his men had killed 283 warriors, captured 292, killed countless women and children, and only suffered 5 casualties themselves in just 23 engagements. The bill to the state for the Rangers' services amounted to $11,143.43. Scholars, however, state that the damage to the area and natives in particular was even higher than reported, especially given the vast number of raiding parties formed outside of the Eel River Rangers. The Fraser Canyon War was a series of violent attacks on Nlaka'pamux communities by miners in 1858. The war ended with a truce on August 21, 1858, when the Nlaka'pamux agreed to allow miners access to their resources and territories. The war had several consequences, including British sovereignty. British officials asserted sovereignty over the region that would eventually become British Columbia. Chief Spintlum's Peace Treaty. Chief Spintlum's decision to negotiate a peace treaty with American Captain Henry Snyder saved lives and prevented American expansion into British Columbia. Test of colonial authority. The war tested the new administration's control over the goldfields, which were difficult to access from Victoria. The war began when the Nlaka'pamux sent the headless bodies of 2 French miners downstream, who were allegedly responsible for attacking a Nlaka'pamux woman. The miners formed military companies and organized militias to pacify the Nlaka'pamux. The war included violence. Miners attacked Nlaka'pamux communities, ransacked and burned Aboriginal towns, and murdered men, women, and children. Peace negotiations. Chief Spintlum and 11 Indigenous chiefs negotiated a peace treaty with Captain Henry Snyder. Miners' militias. The miners' militias left for Spuzzum, where they sent reports to the Nlaka'pamux at Lytton that they wanted to make peace. The Bald Hills War was a conflict in California between 1858 and 1864 that involved the California militia, local volunteers, and Native American tribes. The United States won the war. The war involved the following: assembling forces. The California militia and local volunteers were assembled. The Trinity Rangers were also established as a final blow to the Wilkut. Establishing forts. Forts were placed in various areas for the war. Fighting. The California militia, U.S. Army, and several Native American tribes fought. The war was part of a series of conflicts between settlers and local Indian tribes in California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona territories. Lippett, as commander of the California Volunteers, and engaged in extended patrolling and skirmishing in the redwood forests and Bald Hills. Most of the tribes were forced to make peace by August 1864, and the California Volunteers manned local garrisons until the Civil War's end in 1865.